We had to have a more serious recession than the one we had. But again, the politicians didn't want that. They wanted people to keep spending even though they weren't working. And, the consequences were obvious to me. It's just amazing that so many other people in government, couldn't see it. Asset prices are going to collapse. Companies are going to default. Investors are going to lose money. There's no way around that. It's just impossible to avoid that. A lot of jobs are going to be lost. Now, a lot of jobs are going to be gained too, but jobs are going to be lost. I mean, we have to lose the wrong jobs to create the right jobs. If people are employed in areas where they shouldn't be, that labor needs to be freed up to be reallocated to where it needs to be. Now, interest rates have to be much higher. Now, what does that mean? A lot of defaults, a lot of bankruptcies. But of course, it's going to encourage savings, which will finance capital investment again. I mean, the economy will repair. The government is going to have to slash government spending. So obviously, if you're dependent on that spending, it's not good for you. If you used to get a big check from the government and now you get a much smaller check or you get no check at all, that's going to be a big deal. I mean, I think doing the right thing is going to require substantial cuts to Social Security. So a lot of people are not prepared for that, but that has to happen. Now, if we don't do that, then the Social Security benefits are going to be worthless anyway because inflation is going to destroy them. So I think, a measured approach to cutting in Social Security and maybe means testing it is much better than just wiping out everybody's benefits equally through inflation. So we're going to go through pain one way or another. At least the pain that we would go through with me, calling the shots, would be constructive pain. It would be pain that would eventually lead to gain. But the course we're on now is just going to be pain followed by even greater pain. Right. So we need to do the right thing. And if we could make government much smaller and we could eliminate a lot of the government, I would like to liberate the people from having to pay the income tax. I don't want any personal income tax. I don't want any corporate income tax. I don't want people to have to waste money and time calculating the income tax and keeping track of it. I don't want people rearranging their affairs, or spending time trying to avoid taxes. I want them spending their time and their resources trying to generate income, not try to shield it from taxation. We need to go back to taxing consumption. We need a tax system that taxes people when they spend their money, not when they earn their money. That's what the country was founded upon. That was a basic principle that existed until 1913, and I want to go back to that. And that would be a major boom for the U.S. economy. And of course, if I was president, there are so many regulations that I could eliminate with the stroke of the pen that would immediately free up a capital and allow for American business to be much more efficient and much more productive, and money wasn't wasted on complying with all these ridiculous regulations. That money could then be used productively in the real economy. So look, I think capitalism is a very dynamic economic system, and I think it has the ability to deliver substantial gains in standards of living. And it worked in the 18th century, or rather the 19th century, very well. Unfortunately, we didn't have it for most of the 20th century, but if we can go back to it, it can work even better in the 21st century than it worked in the 19th century, and it worked great in the 19th century. Well, I think the market would take them down a lot more than that. At least most assets. There might be some assets that would increase in value, and I think they would, but obviously you've got a lot of companies that have crazy earnings, huge multiples that would crash.
50%.
There's a lot of companies that would go to zero. A lot of companies that have a lot of debt and no earnings, they would go bankrupt. That means real estate is more affordable if you want to buy it. There's two sides to every coin, right? But also, if I own a piece of real estate that goes down in value, but stocks go down in value too, well, if I want to, sell my house and buy stocks, maybe it's a push, right? Because everything has gone down in value. But we're living in a huge bubble, and the bubble has to deflate. And if you've been getting rich off that bubble, you got a problem as the air comes out. And that's why there's a big vested interest in continuing this. But if I had been president 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, And had I been able to do the right thing then, assuming, I can get the right thing through Congress, I mean, you're not making me king, you're just making me president. So we'll see if I could actually get anything done. But I mean, I would try my best. I mean, I would veto every budget, that was not balanced. I would force these massive cuts. And I would, level with the public. I'd do a lot of talks to try to, educate the public to understand, the mess that we're in and how big the stakes are and why we need to. It would have been a lot easier. I mean, it would have been hard. I mean, it would have been hard even back then. There would have been a lot of pain. But because 10 more years of mistakes have been made and the bubble is 10 years bigger, it's going to be worse now. Yeah. And if, we wait another 5 or 10 years, if we even have that long, it would be, even worse than if we did it now. If you have to keep doing larger and larger doses of a drug, the risk is you eventually overdose. And that is the point where I think we're at, where the next batch will be the batch that doesn't, where we overdose and kill the dollar and destroy the economy. Well, I think the dollar has risen based on the false expectation that the Fed is going to win its fight against inflation, and that to win that fight, it's going to raise interest rates, and those higher rates are helping the dollar. But I think the markets are wrong. I think the Fed is going to surrender. Inflation is going to win the fight. I think the Fed is going to ultimately pivot, that Powell is going to turn his attention from inflation to the economy, that the Fed is going to go back to stimulus because the recession that we're already in and that so many people are denying is going to get much worse. We are in danger of an actual financial crisis if the Fed continues to raise rates, which it may. And if that crisis hits, the Fed is going to go back to the QE well, not only by trying to cut rates, but by printing more money to buy up more bad debt. But unlike the last few times they did that, the Fed is going to be doing that with inflation already very high. So what the Fed was able to hide behind was that inflation was still below their 2% target. And so therefore, they could still print a lot of money. And even if inflation went up, well, that wasn't a risk. That was actually a benefit. That was enabling the Fed to kill two birds with one stone, help the economy and achieve their 2% inflation target, which never made any sense to me. And I called the Fed out for that lunacy. And you had the same thing in Europe and in the UK. They kept saying, we don't have inflation, we need more. Yeah, we needed more inflation like a hole in the head, and now we've got it, right? But I knew that was just a bunch of nonsense. But if the Fed tries to go back to 0% interest rates, if the Fed tries to go back to QE with inflation at 6% or higher, right now it's still 8.5%, but if inflation is triple 2%, you can't justify throwing gasoline on an inflation fire.